Hello, welcome to another episode of Jobs and Careers with Sue. Today, we're going to talk about how parenthood shapes the work experience. And for us to do that, I have a special guest with me, Zainab. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sue. My name is Zaina Bruain. My pronouns are she, hers. A little bit about me. I have worked in the corporate world for a lot of my career. I was in commercial insurance and then I worked in medical device marketing. I have an MBA. But it wasn't until I really had children, until I realized that the workplace doesn't have a great path for and many workplaces don't have great paths for uh, parents of young kids, mothers. And so I've been working in DEI consulting for the better part of the last decade now. And since that was part of the reason I made the switch, my becoming a parent, I think about this quite a lot. I do a lot of reading on the subject, and it also comes up with clients here and there.
Wonderful. So you're exactly the person we should be speaking to. I'm delighted to have you. So you used an acronym just a second ago, DEI. Can you tell me what that stands for?
Absolutely. It stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Got
Mhm.
it. Thank you. Let me launch into, of course, I have some questions written down for you because I want to make sure we talk about this topic in the most robust way. So the first question that I have written down is, what is the workplace experience for parents?
Such a valuable question. I wish I had one answer, like, "It's fabulous," or "Not so fabulous," but it really depends, and it depends on, I think, a number of different factors. One of the bigger ones that I see is age of children, and so the experience for parents of little kids ages 1 to 5 is often the most physically exhausting, loss of nights of sleep, often the time where you're also transitioning into parenthood, so it's like the shock of having so much responsibility is there, and that could be if you're going from 0 to 1 kid or even 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. You would think the shock goes away after 1 child, but it really doesn't. It's a new, very real sense of responsibility with each child. Um, I will say, though, in that age, childcare does tend to be a little more comprehensive in the sense that you can have an early drop off and a late pickup at many daycares. Or, I know folks will have nannies or nanny shares or sitters that, can work hours that you request. Which kind of brings me then to the next age group of 6 to 12, I'd say, where I think parents take a little breath because kids are more um, automated in the workplace, but having said so maybe there's less sleepless nights for parents in the workplace, and there's less of the germs going around as maybe you would have had in the earlier years, but it gets trickier because the workday typical workday is 9 to 5 in the corporate world, and school typically ends around 3 o'clock, and bus drop off in the morning is 8:30. So it's challenging if you've got an in-office job, or any sort of in-person shift work, that is tricky. It just doesn't align. Schoo School doesn't align with what work needs oftentimes. And then I'll also say for folks who work longer shifts, it gets even trickier because to find, drop off and pick up if you work in the kind of, industry or job where it's a long shift, overnight shift, late night shift, you do need some support to just get the child to and from school at the very least. And then 12 to 18, from what I've heard, that age is where in the workplace, I think the stigma for taking time off tends to there tends to be one there a little bit more where it's like, well, your kids are older. Like, why do you need to come home for XYZ or why do you need to be driving them here? And so I think for parents, the experience is okay, my kids are a bit more automated and I can be at work from 9 to 5 a little more easily or maybe work a shift a bit more easily, but the psychological and emotional labor is much more. And so you're in this phase of life where kids need mentoring and emotional support and guidance into adulthood. And so that can often, it also means, maybe you're helping them leave the house or helping them go to college or helping them find their first job. These are all things that, take place sometimes during what is the workday. I think overall for all age parents, a common term that I hear is burnout because they're just bending themselves backwards to find the care with the young years, um, get support when the kids are younger. And then later, it's just the mental exhaustion of trying to help the child move to their next phase in life. And so this term I often gets thrown around of like, all right, I'm at work, but I'm feeling burnt out because of all these other responsibilities. I will say, so I sort of listed all the weights and heaviness. I think there's positives also in the workplace experience, particularly for mothers. Depression rates are lower for mothers who are in the workplace, and studies show this, where depression rates tend to be lower for mothers who stay engaged in the workplace. They say there's a myriad of reasons, but one being a little less social isolation and being able to get out of the house, and sometimes it helps afford support and care. Mm, but I'll also say that being a parent, mother, father, uh, parent, caregiver of children, you learn like your brain learns many new tasks that I think are also applicable to the workplace. So you're forced into project managing, you're forced into managing finances much better. And so you do learn all these new skills, as messy as it might be in the process, just through expanding family and caring for kids.
Got it. Got it. And to add to some of what you were saying, obviously, if you work weekends, like you mentioned, overnight shifts already, rather you work in retail or maybe you're always on call, all of that has impact on childcare, as well as if you work from home. Some people assume if you work from home, you don't have childcare issues, but that is so far from the truth. And so you sort of in your response, you talked mainly about having to go to work. Can you talk a little bit about being a working parent when you're working from home?
Yes. And I can relate to this. I work from home a lot of the time. Um, so the experience I think is probably, has the flexibility, which is a big perk for a lot. So I have more flexibility, or I think many work from home remote parents will say the flexibility for drop off and pickup is there, which is a big one that I don't did not exist, years ago. And so there's ease of that. There's ease of, doing the pickups for sick children, doctor's appointments. There's just more time in the day to take care of the children, because the less commute time, assuming you've got to commute, more than a couple of minutes to your workplace. So there's that. I will say working from home remotely is also has its own challenges where comparing it to office work where you're automatically seeing people are reminding you of things, you have people to collaborate with. It has the challenges of you have to be extremely self-sufficient. You have to be able to reach out. You have to be able to, um, really be the full owner of your work, and it's not that that isn't the case for folks in office, but from my personal experiences, I found that a lot of work would just get done naturally by physically being in front of people. Decisions would get made quickly, ideation could happen just much more quickly, and probably with less mental energy and administrative effort than when you're remote. Because every time I need to connect with somebody, I've got to make sure it's on their calendar, that we make the time efficient, um, that I'm clear with my ideas. There isn't much time, extra time, to then talk about it afterwards in the break room or all that stuff. So it just, it's a lot of, benefits, but it does take a new skill set, I think, to really be successful and impactful working remotely as a parent.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Also, some parents work from home with kids in the house or in the
Mhm.
home, maybe because they're of a certain age, or maybe childcare was difficult to find, or maybe you have a nanny or a sitter taking care of the child in the house. Um, Setting the boundaries of a closed door, quote unquote, as well as blurred lines of kind of feeling like you're always a parent and always working at the same
Mhm.
time. Like,
Yes.
even if you're in a work meeting, you kind of feel like you're still acting as a parent because your child's in the house or children
Mhm.
are in the house, but also feeling like you're always working, where you could be, putting your kids to bed at 8 p.m., but you're just also wanting to respond to that work email or
Yes.
being asked to respond to that work email. Um, can you talk about, like, how do you set boundaries between parenthood and work? Or are there boundaries, whether you're working from home or actually at the workplace?
Yes. I think this like, the I think this is evolving, basically, is what I'm seeing, from myself and fellow parents of mine, and also just from reading and all that I do. I think in the past, the boundary was like, "Don't talk to me before 9 or after 5," and folks tried to keep that when they went to work remotely, but then they found that doesn't necessarily flow with the natural, movement of their day. Because, for example, as a parent, I can be very on from about 8:30 until 3:30, but if the kids are home and after school programs not happening or there's no childcare, the 3:30 to 5 period, even 3:30 to 5:30 is really intensive parenting where they're transitioning them from school to home. There's often a lot of feelings involved, especially with younger kids. And I also think with high school, older kids too, just kind of decompressing from the day, but also the meal prep, um, home management. I find my home gets messiest at that time of the day. All those things, keeping track of everything. It's intensive work during those hours. So I would need to plan it in advance to have, like, a deep thinking meeting at 4:30 to 5:30 PM, um, if I didn't have childcare that day, and if the kids are home. And so, I think instead of what I'm seeing and what I have found useful is, blocking off times in the day where you're just not available and having that be that, and accepting it with yourself and having, communicating to the team. That's one option. Also just asynchronous work. So perhaps I know some friends really like getting an hour of work done after the kids go to sleep because there's just silence in the house. And I know as a remote working parent that is like peaceful and you feel like the noise in your brain is gone as well. Sometimes it's that evening shift to just do some deep thinking, maybe get a deliverable done or get some sort of work done in that quiet time. I've also heard of people doing this, like, early in the morning before kids are awake. So that way there's just the more flexibility in the day. Oh, I do think it is tricky in the sense that the lines can get very blurred easily, and it's on the remote worker to make sure that they don't, and to really, be comfortable with setting the boundaries, maybe not as clear in in the 9 to 5 or the whatever the shift is, but just ebbing and flowing with it through the day.
Got it. Got it. Um, let's talk about what are some things that we can do to support working parents as colleagues. Let's say we're not working parents ourselves, but we work with a working parent, or we manage a working parent, or we work for a working parent. What are some things we can do to support them?
So, I think first off is remember that, like, parents need work relationships too. And so, a lot of times I know when I was younger, first entering the workplace, the parents who were in similar roles as me sort of had this little it's like, "Oh, well, they're a parent. They have kids at home. That's why they rush out right at 5, or that's why they don't have any time for small talk." And you kinda knew who the parents were, and I think a lot of times people just assume parents are overbusy and don't have time for the small talk or the after work get together or any of that. But I would say take the time to just build a relationship with the parents that you work with beyond work, even if it's just that couple of, the coffee, virtual coffee, or a couple of extra minutes to plan spillover, maybe in a virtual meeting, to have that conversation because for those who don't have kids, sometimes it's helpful to hear from folks who do have kids so it doesn't seem like they're just always rushing off or busy or not interested. I know I feel that sometimes where it's like, it's not that I don't care about getting to know others or talking, spending the extra time, but I'm looking at the watch and I'm going to have to pick somebody up in 20 minutes or I need to be home for bedtime, all those things. Um, so I know from being a parent, I really appreciate when people ask me things about the kids or just acknowledge, um, you know, our personal relationship and whatever it is that we can talk about in addition to just work things. Because then I just feel a little bit less judged too for doing that. So I think that's one, take the time to build the relationships with parents if you're not already. Um, I would say the other one is as much as possible, destigmatize flexible working. Because I still think that happens where, there's certain labels given to folks who are able to show up to work and be on for an extended period of time versus the ones who are like, always communicating that they need to be offline or need to be away for an hour for, take a kid to a doctor's appointment and come back. Um, I think the more that can be destigmatized, that's helpful. And so some of that can come from even, sharing when you have a doctor's appointment saying, I just need to take care of myself, I'm going to take an hour. Um, Taking the breaks for yourself as well. So that way when the parents take it, it doesn't feel like they're the only ones because I think parents are good about vocalizing and verbalizing when they have needs for their kids oftentimes. But when I know when I didn't have kids, when other people don't have kids, you can kind of you don't necessarily have to communicate as much all the time. Um, so that's another one. Um, I would also say I've seen some other creative things happen where this really depends on your workplace, but some situations that have helped me, and I've also read about this being helpful, is some sort of um, collaborative working, whether it is sharing a shift or sharing a role for a short period of time, partnering up on projects. So that way, someone's always there to pick up the slack. Again, not always possible with different types of work. However, if you can find an ally, I often find that other parents will be able to lean on each other. But I also say, like, why not? If you don't have children too, it's okay to sort of support this because it benefits everybody. Some sort of project work or role sharing. So it's like, all right, you're a lead on this you know, for this project, but if something happens, I've got you as backup, and it just happens naturally. So I think that could be really effective and just great support. Let me just take a breath. um, Other things which I think are vital to parental health are also as much as possible, if it's shift work, for parents to have daytime shifts over all night shifts. There are studies that show that extended shifts that run into the late night hours are really hard on a person's health, whether it's your cardiac health, your mental health, all of that. And so, as much as you can advocate for your coworkers and others to have just healthy shift lengths and timings, that benefits everybody, especially parents. And so maybe you still need the nighttime shifts, so maybe they're broken up into smaller shifts or they're less frequent for everybody.
Thank you. You share some really good ways to support your fellow working parent at the workplace. And just to highlight or reiterate some of what I heard is normalizing only working hours. So if you're scheduled 8 to 5, if you're scheduled 5 to 12 or whatever your schedule may be, kind of normalizing that you punch in and punch out, and stop assuming that just because they're not working late, that they're not as dedicated somehow, to the work. So I feel like I have to ask you this question, and I'll ask it, which is, there is this sort of perception, or I've heard some mumblings, whether it's retail or other spaces where they're like, "Well, why how come they get better
Mm.
shifts because they're a parent?" Or, "How come
Mm.
they get to leave early?" Or, "How come they don't have to work holidays because they don't have a family?" Because excuse me, because they have a family. Or in the restaurant business, I kinda hear, "Well, I have to work holidays because I don't have children, and people
Mhm.
who have children don't have to work holidays," or they're giving sort of preferential treatment to not have to work holidays. Talk to me about that. Any thoughts about that kind of pushback or misconception?
I do think it's often I think parents often have a little bit of a magnifying glass on them, again, because many parents, like, there's a joke I heard that said, "You don't have to ask a parent if they have kids because they will tell you." And I find that quite a bit where it's like, it so parents will have to advocate for themselves, and I think that lends to, a bit of a magnifying glass that happens. So I think there's that. I also do think employers could probably do a better job at communicating how things are assigned and why they're assigned, and coming up with a process that isn't just emotion based. Because of course it's going to be hard to, you know, fairly assign shifts if one person is coming in um, with a clear case for needing a certain shift, or another person is like, "Well, I just need rest and I'm tired." And so I think if employers can have, a fair process or some process that they can explain, that's the ideal. And I think as an employee, it's fair to ask. From what I've seen is that it usually is mumblings, as you said, and it becomes a little toxic. It's like behind the scenes. No one really wants to bring it up because it's like, who wants to take Christmas away from the working mother? And um, but I think asking gently about what the process is actually beneficial for everybody, because I would say many parents advocate for themselves, but there are a number that don't and don't know how and don't feel that they can. So the more you can ask about what the process is, it does help and everybody. So folks are clear on what it is, and so it can be leveraged and used. One example I'll give of this is a previous company I worked at. This was before remote work was really accepted. It was about 10 years ago. Um, the company, like, deep down in their handbook, had this policy of core hours where you just had to be online or in the office available for meetings from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And for whatever reason, parents were just very aware of the core hours, and the norm was that, like, oh, the parents worked the core hours, but for whatever reason, other people didn't. And it just became this norm, but it wasn't written in the policy that only parents can work 10 to 3. It just that's what happened, until people started asking about it and utilizing it a bit more. Um, so yeah, just thought I'd share that example.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I know we've been focusing on working mothers
Mm,
in a
mhm.
lot of your examples. Can you talk about working fathers or working grandparents or working uncles or working guardians? Um, because they have needs too.
So I think things have changed a bit. However, in the sense that we're seeing more more than just mothers. Like, it's usually the typical mother who is pictured as carrying the load. I don't think that's the case as much. I still think it's predominantly the case. However, working fathers are experiencing all of the hard things that I mentioned, whether it's burnout, leaving the office or work for appointments, doing pickups and drop offs. Oftentimes, it's also an uncle, or an aunt, a grandmother, um, somebody, and these are blood or chosen as well, chosen family that is pitching in the childcare experience, and just raising of kids. And so I think to answer your question is the barriers and challenges that I mentioned apply across really anybody who is taking care of a child. And I think the more that we talk about that, again, just removes the stigma that exists for working people who are taking care of kids in the workplace.
Mm, absolutely. I I do think that there is quite a bit of studies that show that working mothers still continue to carry most of the child care responsibilities, but at the same time, we'd be remiss to assume that only working mothers need the support. That working fathers and working grandparents and guardians and so forth need the support as well. Um, there's also, this assumption that, well, the other parent will take care of the child,
Mm,
and that, uh, why don't you have your other parent take care of the child for you to have that early morning meeting or for you to go to this company event when sometimes there may not be another parent who can do that. So kind of putting aside some assumptions, you kind of you touched on this a little bit earlier, but sometimes there's this sort of assumption that working parents aren't as ambitious about their career or they shouldn't be given additional responsibilities because they're
yeah.
already, drained as a working parent or parents returning to work. Can you talk a little bit about why working parents should have same access to different career opportunities and why they may be even more effective at work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, why? Because it's fair, and, that's what my gut wants to say, of course, they should have more access. Having said that, if you write down, like, all the business case for parents, it might not look as great as someone who doesn't have kids, I guess, blatantly speaking. Having said that, there's so much that parents can offer because, well, one, the income is so needed in many households where parents really need to stay engaged, and the value for that job is so high. They're feeding other people, feeding other mouths. Maybe for a lot of folks, it's like most of their salary will go towards childcare, but that is worth it for the benefits of their mental health and, keeping a career path open. And so all those things, a parent will value a job so much. And, I think figuring out ways to continue to keep them engaged often gets forgotten. I will say, especially with remote work, a lot of times remote workers get forgotten, and a lot of parents opt for remote work when it's possible, because, we know there's proximity bias where we tend to favor folks who are like in front of us, So if it's an office or shift work and you're right in front of them, you're gonna have a little more of a leg up at work. Um, but to get to your question as to why, I mean, I think parents, as I had said earlier, bring so many new skills to the workplace. As a parent, you have to learn so many things that even from personal experience that I didn't necessarily have to learn as somebody who wasn't a parent. So as a parent, you have to learn how to project manage and multitask. Be really diligent about timelines, deadlines, milestones, even about what work can be done in parallel with teammates and what work needs to be collaborative. It's also what work, for example, if you have more of an in-person type of job, what work can be done in person and what work really maybe you can take home. Maybe you work for a really small business and you need to work the cash register from certain hours. But maybe there's certain things like tallying up receipts and, checking inventory, things that can be done at different hours. And so the why I think is definitely there. It's just a matter of figuring out how I think work changing the perception in workplaces and figuring out how to keep parents also engaged. I think a lot of parents will subscribe out of the workplace and opt for either, if they can, staying at home or starting their own small business because they can manage all these things on their own without any sort of stigma or worry about others. But there's a lot of that's taxing. That is not everybody can do that, and it's very taxing on a household financially and on all resources. Did I answer your question? I said a lot. I don't know if I answered it.
Yes, you did answer it. And some of the things I would like to highlight is, um, you know, don't assume parents aren't as ambitious with their career. Some of the parents may want to cut back. Some of them may want additional responsibilities. I think what I'm hearing is don't assume
Mhm.
that there's a certain career path that they're looking to achieve. Second is don't assume that just because they're taking care of someone that they don't care as much about that career or that the job isn't of great value. In fact, it may be, even greater value because they need that salary and that income to support their family. I'm also really leaning into what you said earlier, which is um, parents have developed some amazing skills because they had to, and they could utilize those skills at work, rather it's multitasking, rather it's project management, rather it's thinking ahead of time, rather it's
Yes.
planning, rather it's,
Mhm.
all those skills, and dare I even say negotiation skills and patience
Oh, yes. Yes.
and time management and all of
Yes.
those things, right?
Well, I was
Um,
also gonna say emotional
yeah,
regulation.
yes.
I also think, when you're earlier, at least from what I have read and seen, early on in your career, work is very personal. Everything is personal. But I think when you become a parent, you don't really have as much time for it to be quite as personal, where it's
Mm,
really about the work. It's really about how, you don't necessarily have as much time or patience for the toxicity or the drama that sometimes exists behind the scenes. You really just need to work together and get work done. And I think parents are really adept at that. Um, especially as their kids get older and parents have to develop ways of guiding their kids through peer struggles, collaborating at school. You are also teaching yourself things as a parent that are very applicable to the workplace.
mm. Absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned a few times that some parents have gotten really good at advocating. Um, let's lean into those parents who may struggle a little bit for advocating for themselves,
Mhm.
and or may be in a work environment where they feel like they can't advocate for themselves. Can you talk a little bit about what can they do to make sure that they have the best work experience for themselves?
Yeah. I would say take a deep breath first. and and the first one, the first thought I'll offer is focus on work relationships because I think a lot of parents are want to get work done and want to have kind of this chip on their shoulder sometimes about like showing like I can do a really good job even though I'm a parent or even though I'm taking care of kids. Um, but having said that, I think the magic of workplaces is really the relationships that you form, before, during, after projects, because that's what will also help you out should the job not work out. Should something happen, um, should for whatever reason the economy goes down, all the powers that be that we can't control. The one thing that you can do as a parent is really lean into good relationships. And those are usually the things that will get you maybe the next part-time job or get you a contract or introduce you to someone else. And so I would say also take your relationships as seriously as you do the task list. Because again, those are the things that sometimes also lead to friendships, places that you can share experience, people you can share personal things with. But, those are the folks that might be able to help you in the future. Um, should you need to leave the workplace for a little bit and come back, you have folks to reach back out to. And I think on the flip side, I know your earlier question was like, how can you support parents at work? Going back to that is if you see a parent leaving the workplace and they say it's for caregiving or parenting reasons, make the effort, reach out once every couple months, check on them. It goes a long way. It helps that parent also be reminded that, hey, this person's still reaching out. I still have folks I can connect with and just extend the it's not olive branch, but just extend a hand. Mhm.
Mhm. Awesome. So, in addition to building and maintaining good work relationships, any other tips on how parents could advocate for themselves at work?
Yeah, absolutely. So things that are less out loud than saying, I'll start with some quieter things and then move to the more out loud things. But I would say take a look at what kind of flexibility you have for taking pauses, whether that's days off, mental health days, and plan the time throughout the year in advance if you can. I think oftentimes what happens is we parents won't take time off just planning for sick days, planning for your own sick days, planning for kids. But as much as you can, if possible, plan for pockets of time off, even if it's just a half day or a day off to just for yourself, for your own health and, um, for your own, just remembering that you are somebody outside of workplace and parenting. So I would say that use whatever your work allows you to do, obviously, as well. I would say more out loud, be clear with bosses and supervisors about, for example, the times of year that you might struggle with childcare. And I say that because I do think parenting, especially as the kids get older and, they're assuming they're in school, it comes in seasons. A lot of parents tend to be calm in the fall because school has started, and then you can sense kind of the holiday shuffle happening, which I think many people can relate to, parents or not. But then there's the spring break and then end of year school where there are just gaps in childcare, and sometimes it's just a week before the camp starts, but a week at the end of school and then it's also a week before school starts. Sometimes it's a week and a half, 2 weeks. Those add up. And what I find is a lot of parents are like, "I'll just tough it out." I'll work remote with the kids screaming in the background, or one of us will take off, but it's still a very challenging time of year. So I'd say to the extent you're possible, just communicate that with the folks who need to know, whether it's your people you're co-collaborating with, people you're working shifts with, just so they understand, if you need to adjust work that time of year, you can get ahead of it. It's not happening reactively. I would just share it and see how they react. Some folks might get a little, surprised or taken aback, but in the end, it's information that you're sharing to help you show up better. Because maybe other times of year you can take on certain things um, to even the workload out, or take on a bit more to then take on a bit less those times of year.
Got it. And I hear summer vacations are also rough. Summer camps are rarely, for
Hmm.
extended period of time, and you have to sometimes pack lunch and all that good stuff. So, this is I've heard this for decades, but I have to ask the whole, how do you sneak out of work to go to your kids' play question, that whole like, can I really leave at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to go see my kids' sports events or that school play that we always talk about? Can you talk a little bit about, how do you advocate for yourself or how do you feel comfortable with doing what you need to do as a parent?
Yeah. It is challenging. I will say it can be challenging, and it depends on the team you're on sometimes and who you're working with. If you're working with folks who are in the same boat as you, it's almost like, good for you. The reception might be so positive that it's like, go to that place, send us pictures afterwards. And folks are admiring, all the cuteness or the milestones and all that. So that could be one environment. Another one is just that no one talks about it. No, maybe they're doing it, but no one talks about it. I think in that case, it's still worth bringing up because everyone was a child at one point, and many of us will have children or do have children, but maybe don't talk about it as much. I think normalizing it as much as you can really benefits everybody, even though it might be a bit uncomfortable. And so bringing it up, and if your workplace also feels nervous about it, you can just give them some guardrails. Say, I'm leaving at this time. I'll be back at this time. Don't worry. All of my deadlines will be met. All my work is going to be done. I don't need to move any meetings for this. If you need to add that extra layer of sort of clarity and just security in some environments, that might be helpful.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
No, I do want to acknowledge some jobs that is just not the case. So, for example, if you work in a hospital or if you work, if you're a frontline worker or if you are um, any kind of first responder, shift work that requires you to physically be there, it is challenging. And so I think in those scenarios, you really have to know that you might be questioning norms a bit, changing the norms and asking for that a bit more. Just be ready for the conversation, but know that it is worth it because it's beyond yourself. You're helping a lot of other people by doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for some, maybe it's just a planned paid time off.
Mhm,
You're using your PTO or vacation hours or anything, any other hours, and you are out of the office from 2 to 5 on a Thursday, and maybe they don't need to know why you're doing it, right? If you don't
mhm,
feel comfortable sharing it, that's time you have every right to take. The other thing is sometimes, parents are kinda critical of other parents.
mm,
Uh, so, "I didn't take time off to do that," or "I never do this," or "I have no problem asking for time off." And so can you lean into that a little bit or talk a little bit about, A, not all parents are the same, not all parents' needs are the same, and B, don't assume because it works for you as a parent that that is what will work for someone else as a parent.
yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, not all parents are created equal. Not all parents are the same. And I just wanna bring up some real things that happen that people probably feel less comfortable about, where, being a parent increases your risk for depression. It's usually women that talk about this, and you picture, people talk about postpartum depression and depression later on, but there's studies showing that fathers experience depression at much higher rates than we thought in the past. And so, and it's past just the uh, the child being a baby. It can continue. And so that's one example, but also there's a lot of other sort of health challenges that parents are faced with. And for whatever reason, whether it's genetics or our environment, some parents are not as impacted as others. So it could be as simple as like some parents just catch the flu a lot more than other parents. Some parents, maybe they had a disability that they were managing fairly well before having children, but when you have children, that could really, um, cause flare-ups or maybe increase the how chronically the disability impacts work. So all of these real factors really come into play where it's so much more than just you know, about people's motivation or what they're bringing to work, like really hard barriers that people just don't bring up. There's also children come in different, um, packages in the sense that you talk to parents where it's like they look fine. You would never even think they had a child because they have a baby who slept 9 hours every night you know, out of the hospital. But that's not the case for most parents. Many parents have babies who don't sleep a night until they're at least a year old. Um, that's just one example, but children also have illnesses, disabilities that just add more to a parent's plate and can make things more complex. I'll also say number of children that parents have really impact, I think, the complexity and, um, how parents show up in the workplace. Um, Sue, can you just restate your question? I want to make sure I'm on track with what you asked.
Yeah, absolutely. So parents reminding themselves that not other parents have the same needs or have the same experiences, basically.
Yes, and sometimes I'll admit I think I'm guilty of it too, where it's like, I've been collaborating with somebody who's another parent, and then I'm taking on more of the load because child is sick, and I'm just like, oh my god, if my kid gets sick, this is over. We can't get this work done, and it's there. It does happen. Having said that, I think the best thing you can do is just ebb and flow with work. Reach out when you need help. Don't feel like you need to take on extra work for a parent who is not able to complete work. I think it's just a moment to say, let's take a pause and reevaluate the workload, or let's take a pause and reevaluate these shifts. Let's just discuss how we can get this done. Maybe a deadline has to move. And this happens to everybody, but I think with parents and multiple kids, it's a conversation that happens very frequently. It needs to happen frequently. Mhm.
Mm. So what I'm hearing is, remember, just like everybody else, parents are not monolithic. Some parents may be leaning, for more responsibility. Some may be leaning for less responsibilities. They may have kids with different abilities and illnesses. They themselves may be suffering from illnesses and other family dynamics, all of that. And so to basically not judge and to kind of advocate for what you need and don't assume others need the same thing. You mentioned that in your example with to this question, you talked about how, some parents may have more struggles with depression. Earlier, you had said that working parents have less depression at work. So can you
Mhm.
reconcile those two statements for us?
Yeah. So I think being a parent overall raises your risk for depression. Being engaged in a workplace then lowers it a bit. So being engaged in a workplace, having a psychological, mental outlet that, and the data behind it is basically having a role outside of just being a parent can actually have positive benefits. And most of those studies that I had read were really about working moms, but I would imagine it applies to other parents.
Got it.
In addition, I mean, that's actually the softer part, but also working also brings income into the home. It brings financial stability, which allows for food on the table. It allows for after school programs, rent to be paid, housing, all those things that, you know, will definitely ease a person's mental health. Mhm.
So it could be very helpful for some parents to work, and it'll be really helpful for workplaces to have working parents. Those are all my questions, Zainab.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments or tips you would like to add about workplace experience for working parents?
Um, yes. I think the big one that is coming to my mind is how valuable it is for workplaces to invest in parents, but also parents to advocate for their own career growth. I think a lot of times parents feel like, well, I'm giving everything I can. I don't want to take on more. So I'm just going to stay here. Or I don't want to rock the boat because I have a good thing going. Having said that, we always need to be learning and growing in our careers to be valuable in the workplace. And I think it goes two ways. If you can figure out ways to continue to grow, whether it's through learning programs or, letting your employer know that you're interested in growing, but these are maybe the scheduling limitations for doing so. Keep the conversation open because I think it's also helpful for parents to be able to see some sort of path in their career and not just be pigeonholed into certain roles because it works for their schedule. And so I think that's just an important something I wanted to say. And, yeah, that's basically it.
Great. Anything else?
Nothing else for now.
It has been a great episode to talk about the experience of working parents. And thank you very much, Zainab, for joining us. I really appreciate all your thoughts and tips.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks for having me. This was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Thank you again for joining another episode of Jobs and Careers with Sue. Today was all about how parenting or parenthood shapes work experiences. And it was such a great conversation. So like, subscribe for more episodes like this one.